This episode is brought to you by Minus 33. For high-quality merino wool base layers, tops, gloves, socks, and more, go to minus33.com and use code 33backcountry15 at checkout to get 15% off your first order. Welcome to the Backcountry Podcast. I'm Adam Howard.
Because I think there are some touring bindings that can manage moderate resort days just fine and save a huge amount of weight. And I think there's some skis in the 6-pound range, less than 7 pounds, will be perfectly fine for resort skiing, most places, most days. And it'll be light enough for touring and ski really well, crud crust powder.
We're calling this episode Gear Crazy. Given the epic demand on touring gear and the unprecedented way Backcountry had to test gear last year, we thought it would be a good idea to pull together some of our veteran testers to talk about their experience last winter. Because it's from that experience that our editors made selections for this year's gear guide. We get into those details a bit, how we tested, how we made the best of the pandemic situation. And we also talk about quivers of one, why tele gear hasn't changed in a decade, and the best skins on the market today. And of course, we share some of our favorites. Joining me from Steamboat are Marla and Jeremy, or Shaggy Bailey. From Bozeman, our Technical Editor Lance Riek. And from here in Vermont, Darrin McLeod and our very own Tyler Cohen. All right, everybody, welcome to the Backcountry Podcast. We're here tonight to talk about gear. And obviously, given the pandemic, we did it much differently than we ever have in the past. Tyler, why don't you tell us a little bit about how we did it this year?
Yeah, so we did it entirely differently than we've done in the past. In the past, we've all gotten together at Powder Mountain in Utah for 5 days in March. And this year we brought the test to the people. People stayed where they were and in about 8 different locations across the country: Vermont, Steamboat, the Tetons, Crested Butte, Tahoe, the Wasatch, and Bozeman. We had collections of about 8 to 10 individuals who were kind of working loosely together with one test administrator in each zone. They received product from about 8 brands, so maybe 15, 20 pairs of skis, tested them for about 2 or 3 weeks. And then once they had gotten 2 or 3 or 4 testers on each product, they shipped that all off to another zone to have it all tested again. So it was like a big, crazy game of musical chairs with UPS and FedEx helping us out along the way.
Yeah, it was epic. And we had most of the boots here in Vermont, had a boot room in the back of the office with a heater, the whole 9 yards. And Darrin, you were a big part of that. I believe you tested, sample size foot that you are, every single boot we had here on the men's side. How was your experience compared to what it had been like in the past?
In some ways good, in some ways bad. In good, I could spend more time in each boot. I'd grab a couple pair of boots for a day. Whereas when we're out west, you've got some more varied conditions than what we can typically get here in the east. But you only get half a day or 6 runs on each pair of boots. So a lot more time on the boots here, including like skinning days, icy conditions, powder days, woods. So I don't know, it broke up pretty well, but I wouldn't want to do it again because I miss everybody. I want to be back in Utah. Yeah,
no doubt. And Shaggy, Jeremy, and Marla, you guys were our test administrators in Steamboat, and you brought in a bunch of your crew, local crew. I remember talking to you during it. We had a couple Zoom meetings with all the test administrators, and everybody's like, wow, this is a lot of work. Shaggy, we'll start with you. What were some of your takeaways?
That is definitely the case. I have a newfound appreciation for you guys as administrators and general cat herders at our annual tests in the past, and the sheer amount of gear and people you have to manage on a daily basis. Of course, we had a much more scaled down version of that here as did the other locations, but it was still interesting to get kind of a glimpse into how you guys are managing people and skis and getting people on different products and trying to get a sense of what their feedback is and how they could improve or what they need to concentrate or focus on for the next rig they go out on.
Yeah, with the difference being we don't have to have people come to our house. I know that people come into the office and I'd be like, yeah, meet me at 10 o'clock. I'd go in and I'd cook a couple pairs of boots and it'd be like an hour and a half later and I would have gotten no work done. And it was just like a revolving door of people coming through here. So to have folks coming into your house and you guys trying to do your jobs. And Marla, what were some of your takeaways from that?
One of my highlights was learning how to tech bindings. So snapped my thumb a couple times in the binding, but learning, there's so many different manufacturers. So learning all the nuances, I certainly gained an appreciation for all the work that a proper mechanic does. And watching my friend go out on the skis that I just teched always terrified me of whether I'd ever see them again. So that was I definitely have an appreciation for that. But, one thing that really stood out to me with the COVID pod format that we ran this past year was just the sheer amount of volume, the time that you could spend on each pair of skis. Like I felt like I developed a relationship with everything I tested. And there's an opportunity to test it in every condition. So, a true backcountry, every boot that I tested, I actually was able to hike uphill in. And so that was certainly made for a much more, I'd say, robust review and being able to test it kind of on my own schedule and throughout multiple conditions. So that was definitely a highlight.
And Lance, you didn't really facilitate a test pod, but you did test a bunch of gear. What did you notice? What were some of your takeaways?
Basically what Marla said. So it was nice to be able to spend a day on a pair of skis as opposed to sitting in the lodge at lunch saying, I'm missing a ski. Was that the fourth one or the fifth one I've skied this morning? So you could go uphill in them, which of course you don't have the time or the efficiency to fit into the pound mile testing, to decide if that's a ski that's light enough to actually want to kick up the hill or not. And surprisingly, I was worried that testing skis on one day or maybe 2 days, it would be limited conditions. You can usually hunt around at the resort and find a variety of things. You kind of know your run, got a routine to take your ski through. But, I was lucky enough that my days in the backcountry had enough variability. Crusty stuff on the south, powder on the north, a super icy skin track on the way out. So the variability was good. That wasn't a problem. That was a bonus, I'd say. The time on each ski was definitely nice. On the downside, you didn't get to compare multiple skis on the same conditions, the same run. Right. So to kind of put them head to head.
And for our listeners out there, people that read the gear guide, one of our imperatives for the test over the years is Maslow's pyramid, where the testers, all they have to do is test product. We have techs, we have boot fitters, we take care of all the meals. They don't have to drive a car. And what I noticed that I missed this year, not just the social part, but when we're there on a mission, we're talking about gear and you're able to have this give and take about a product or how it rolls. And I felt like, frankly, quite lonely this year, riding up the chairlift at Smuggler's Notch, our home hill here with, one model boot on one foot, one model boot on the other. And that was as close as I got to a community. The whole time was myself and two different boots and a pair of skis. So it'll be interesting when we do get back together this March, how that feels again, because that was, I don't know if you found, Marla, that just the give and take with your fellow testers, did you leave anything did you leave anything out that you normally would have come up with a group, kind of a group think? Is it bad, good? I mean, I guess there's some cons to that too. You can be influenced, though we don't have any manufacturers there.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest differences was just, I think Lance had mentioned it, not having a full realm of gear to be able to test, to be able to have that conversation with your friends. A lot of times it was scheduling. And so most of my testing, I was solo, certainly in my days on the resort lap. Whereas at the test, I would have my buddy, and we swap skis. We'd get them tech one. We'd have two different boots and be able to test two different skis. So you could just swap it over without needing an adjustment. And just to be able to talk, it helps you refine what you like and dislike when you're able to talk about the gear with your comrades, and it definitely makes me much more articulate. not necessarily influencing what I'm going to write and what my experience was on a piece of gear, but it definitely helps you refine what your own words were. So greatly missed that almost as much as my time in the hot tub with you, Howie.
I've been thinking a lot about that too. So I reached out to through our various channels, I reached out to listeners and readers and Instagram followers to get some questions for this podcast. And no surprise, they were kind of mostly people picking on me in one way or another. But one of the questions I get all the time is like, people want a quiver of one set up. And I think one of the things that we take for granted is because we're testers, we don't have to have a quiver of one. But for most people, especially people new to the sport, a quiver of one is what they gravitate toward. And I think, that's really evidenced by the best-selling binding for the last however many years, 3 or 4 years, is the Shift. And on its heels, the new Duke. Frankly, to be quite honest with everyone, I kind of cringe when I think of the Shift, because while it is awesome for a certain skier, it's really not appropriate for most ski tourers. Lance, what do you say to people when they say, I want to get into backcountry skiing and where do I start? And at least with me, I start with a question like, what kind of skiing do you want to do? How do you advise folks that are coming into the sport?
I think you're right. One of the first questions to ask them is, do they plan to spend how much time at the resort and how much time in the backcountry? And do they only have one set up for both? That's a tough call. I mean, if the answer to that is 50-50 and yes, that's a tough call. I think part of it depends on then how hard are they going to ski at the resort? I mean, are they going to be, thrashing icy moguls? That's a different setup. If they want to ski decent snow, then I think it could be a more of a middle ground. And then look at some of the touring bindings, because I think there are some touring bindings that can manage moderate resort days just fine and save a huge amount of weight. And I think there's some skis in the, let's say, 6 pound range, less than 7 pounds, would be perfectly fine for resort skiing most places, most days. And it'll be light enough for touring and ski really well, crud, crust, powder. So trying to figure out what they want. I think what they want, and then couch that in terms of what they're willing to sacrifice. Maybe where they want to have more fun, maybe what matters more to them. If they want something that'll get them by in the resort, but they want a really nice, light powder ski for the backcountry to log big days, then if they understand they're making that trade-off, then that's the way to go. Yeah.
Well, that conversation to me starts with boots. We've all been testing a long time, and it's amazing where boots have gone. Everything's out of this world now. I think of the products that are in this gear guide, and every single one of them is great. Whereas, 15 years ago, even 10 years ago, that wasn't always the case. There were winners and losers, certainly on the boot side. And if I were to advise somebody on a boot, for instance, that can kind of do dual duty pretty darn well, it's hard to find a benchmark that has been the benchmark for as long as the Scarpa Mistrale boot, the RS or the XT. Shaggy, I know that's a favorite of yours. Would you consider that kind of a standard, like one quiver boot?
To piggyback on your mention earlier about things are getting better and better, gear is getting better and better. The 3-buckle boots, I think, are the sweet spot right now. If you're going to have one boot where you're going to spend some time either on the resort and in the backcountry, that's the way to go. There's so many good 3-buckle boots out there, just like there's so many good low, mid 90 waisted skis to 100, 105 waisted skis. It's just, you're spoiled for choice right now, I feel. If you have the luxury of having a boot quiver, then I'd say, and you're really into touring and skiing in the backcountry, then the logical choice there might be to grab a 2-buckle boot as an augmentation to your 1-boot quiver. But yeah, absolutely, the 3-buckle boots are they're awesome. There are so many good choices out there. You mentioned the Mistrale. There's also the Transout Pro. I believe that's a Fisher boot.
Yeah, that was a great introduction this year.
And I think that boot seemed like everyone. I didn't get a chance to hop on it, but reading the reviews and hearing feedback from testers and other pods, that sound like a real standout as well.
Yeah. Lance, did you get on the Del Bello free 130 or 130 free?
No, I skied one of the other Del Bellos, one of the lighter ones.
A Quantum, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Quantum Light, I think it was.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting design. Definitely some change, some innovation there. I spent a couple days on it. It wasn't a great fit for my foot shape, but certainly plenty of power in a light boot.
Darrin, you got in that Del Bello free 130. I was, that boot, like, to look at it, it's comparable to some of the Scarpa Aliens, super Rondo inspired, really light. But, and I saw 130 when it came out of the box, and I'm like, okay, no way.
I chose a day that was supposed to be warm, and it was really icy at Smugs, and I skinned up in it. And as I'm going up on the ice on the super icy groomers, I'm like, oh, I'm going to be dead on the way down in this boot. There's no way I'm going to be able to handle this. But I got to the top, and I locked that Del Bello in, and it was all there. Like, not the best flex, progressive flex, but it was stiff. It was torsionally rigid. I was super surprised. For something that light and that easy to skin up in, it did a fantastic job on the way down, keeping me from not dying.
Marla, how about you? What were some of the surprise boots of the test for you?
Yeah, it's a privilege to be sample size to be able to try all the different boots. Between Shaggy and I, we were fortunate to get the Scarpa Maestrelli for the men and the GF for the women, and we both are now proud owners of a pair. So we now have his and hers, pink and blue. It's just another point for our friends to make fun of us. One of I think just the concept of the boots and what has changed over the years. I think really when the Dina Fit the binding patent expired, and almost every binding now has a tech toe. I think that really opened up the realm across all manufacturers to make some really incredible boots. And you're seeing a lot of what used to be a traditional alpine boot now turned AT, where there's a little bit of flex, and it fits into an AT binding, a tech binding with that pin toe. And you're seeing a whole host of new models coming onto the market that just really, because of the binding revolution to make it easier. It's interesting, my background, I'm a tele skier first. And so, in fact, that's how I started with the Backcountry Magazine test, was always telemark. So I think I never came from the alpine racer. So I'm always looking for something that's light and a little bit softer flexing and has that right forward lead. And just across the different manufacturers, there's a whole host of incredible brands now. And so much of it is, what are you looking for in terms of stiffness versus weight? Because at this point, I think virtually every boot is a pretty solid downhill performer. Those that are more alpine style will certainly, the stiffer they are, the more that they will perform on the down versus the compromise on the weight savings on the way up.
Well, since you mentioned tele, and Tyler can attest to this, every year, Tyler, we get letters from folks wondering why we haven't reviewed any tele gear. And sadly, I think about Shaggy, Marla, myself, Tyler too. It used to be, when we started in 2002 doing this test, it was almost all tele. And then the Freechy Freeride came out, and that introduced a bunch of different boots to the equation, like you say. And now there's really no new tele gear. 22 Designs and Rodafella being the only ones that are innovating much at all. Certainly no innovations in boots. Tyler, we joke around the office. We know these letters are going to come, and they do every year. What do we say to that person?
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of times my response is, you could pick up the 2012 gear guide if you want, because that was likely the last time that we really saw any new boots getting introduced. There are bindings, which that's exciting to see and experience, these new tele bindings coming out. Meijo's got one, 22 Designs has one with the links. Bishop, it's not a tech tele binding, but they reintroduced that bomber binding a couple of years ago. So there's innovation there, but the boots have just totally fallen behind compared to the AT boots specifically. And unfortunately, it's very few boot manufacturers as well, and very, very few boot options that do have the tech fittings in order to step into the tech tele bindings. The fact is most skis work for tele purposes. A surfier rocker taper ski will do the job and will hold up just as well telemark skiing as it does alpine touring, with the exception that there are some really, really lightweight skis that are being introduced now that specify on them do not mount for telemark skiing, because the torque that those bindings put on the mounting plates, the ski can't hold up. So telemark ski on backcountry skis with that caveat.
Yeah, right.
And it's pretty clear. I think it's, Black Diamond's Helios, Vole's Hyper series skis, and I'm sure that there are some others that they are not compatible with tele bindings.
And Howie, if I can add on to that, just to the list, to the reader that's asking about why no more telemark, I probably get asked every time I go skiing, especially when I'm on my AT setup, what are you doing? Have you abandoned tele? Because there's this concept that I've left it. And I mean, the answer is I was resistant initially. And honestly, my AT transition happened because of AT as the ability to test more product as part of the Backcountry, Ski Magazine gear guide. The fundamental difference is that there is no telemark setup that's going to be as light as a modern day AT setup. The binding alone is just it's miles ahead, and it's so much more comfortable. And same thing with the boots. Boots are so light on the AT side. So I AT in the backcountry, and I'll still telemark on the resort just because it's fun. But there is a reason that the market is going that way, and it's very sad that some of the telemark bindings and boots haven't necessarily caught up, or maybe there could still be a resurgence. But in terms of performance and testing, we're kind of following the direction of the market. But there is a reason to AT in the backcountry, as much as it pains me to say that.
I don't anticipate a resurgence in tele until the AT, the backcountry market levels off, and it's done nothing for 30 years now, but go up. And once maybe that tapers off, if it ever happens, then these boot manufacturers might decide, like, okay, we'll invest in some new product. But it's hard not to think about some of this AT boot inspired technology bleeding into tele boots. I think of that Alien, for instance, and gosh, you could make a killer tele boot with that. Tyler?
There continue to be rumors that Scarpa specifically is working on a lighter weight tele boot, and I know that a lot of people create their Franken boots where they put an Alien cuff on a TX Pro base, and I've not had the opportunity to see one. I was looking at a friend's the other day, and it seems like that could potentially be a pretty darn sweet setup, especially if you can put it in that Vole TTS or the Meijo binding or the 22 Designs links.
Let's talk about skis a little bit. Darrin, did you have a standout or two that really struck you this year that you wanted to own?
Volkel has always made a ski that works for me, for my particular skiing style, which is really like to charge hard and lay in some super hard carves and feel the G-forces. And Volkel's been really good at that. From their the Blaze 106, which was actually really fun here on the East Coast, even on a groomer. For something that wide, it was fantastic, really snappy and held a great edge. To their narrower little 96, the Rise Beyond 96 was a ton of fun, super snappy, super poppy, and both of those Volkels were light enough you could go tour in them. So like the Blaze 106 would be a choice for me to use anywhere and everywhere throughout the U.S., wide enough for the West Coast deep snow and still it's torsionally stiff enough when enough of a beef to it for the East Coast groomers.
Shaggy, how about you?
The skis in the mid 90 waisted widths really stood out to me this year. And years past, I kind of not really paid attention or really wanted to ski them. I'd ski them if that was the next on the rack that needed to have a test on them. But I was blown away, and maybe I'm late to the party here this year, but what an ideal blend of tourability they have, soft snow capability, hard snow capability. The Rossignol Alpinair 96, the Hannibal, I think it was a Hannibal, Fisher Hannibal 96, and the Helio 95. We had the opportunity to ski all three of those coming through the Steamboat Pod this past year, and I was blown away. And now I own one of those three, but I'd happily own any of the three.
Right.
They were great. I've seen the light, I guess.
It's interesting because I'm always encouraging people, especially out here. You know, it seems like so often people are skiing really fat skis here as almost like a statement, as opposed to like having something that's useful for how they ski. And, you know, for the most part, I advise folks in the East that you really don't need anything over 95. You know, like Darrin says, that Blaze 106 is awesome, but, you know, you could have a ski, you know, like that, what's the Solomon QST, or the what's the latest version of the Atomic Backland? Is that a 97 now?
We had a total like cluster when we were working on the gear guide, because there's a 97 and a 100.
Well, that 97 is a great ski. And, you know, like to your point, Shaggy, like if you look at the profile of these skis, the waist width is almost deceiving, because you look at the shape of the ski and these 5-point radius skis, you know, that really started with that Dynastar Sham series back going on 10 years ago. Tremendously versatile. They float great. You don't need 110, 120 under the foot anymore, even in deep snow. I mean,
I think back 10 years ago, maybe a little less than that, 5 years ago, but it seemed like all the ski manufacturers were sending us 120 waisted and 110 waisted skis. And that was the hot thing, is to get on those skis. And while they're fun in deep snow, most of us in reality don't get to ski knee deep below or POW every day, day in, day out for a season. I feel like the pendulum has kind of swung back towards reality in terms of going to the 105 waisted skis, the 100 waisted skis, or the high 90 waisted skis. And I feel like that's where we're at now. And that, I think this year, certainly, at least for me, bore that out.
And Lance, this has got to be music to your ears, because you've been preaching this for like 20 years, basically.
Which part? I do a lot of preaching.
Well, no, just how, you know, that you don't need these giant skis. Granted, they don't, you know, a giant ski makes a huge lever under the foot, and you can't run a super light boot with a super big ski. But you've been running pretty narrow skis for a long time. Yeah,
as a tester and helping out with the magazine, I do have the luxury of lots of skis. So I try to think about it as a 3-ski quiver. And every day, which is that 100 waist, a narrower firm snow ski, probably 85 to 90. And then something wider when it is deeper, when even the tip rocker and the shape and everything just isn't going to float you if you've got a bunch of low density snow. And that's probably over 110, you know, between 110 and 115. And to make the counter argument, probably a favorite ski that I tested this year was the DPS Pagoda Tour, the 112. That shape is just perfect for powder. I mean, I think I've skied all the iterations of that mold since all the way back to the Pure, the first one. And so I'm very familiar with it, and it floats straight, and it slides sideways great if that's what you need, or it's very maneuverable for its size. But the interesting part is with the Pagoda Tour, it's just slightly over 6 pounds in the 178. But with that construction, it just rails on the hardback. I skied a great day, you know, a mix of conditions, some powder, some crud down low where it got wet in the afternoon, some good snow, some variable wind blown stuff up high, and then had to come out on a super icy skin track. Like, just, you wouldn't believe, really. I mean, it's such a cliche, but it was in fact a bobsled run with high bank turns and rock hard snow. And it's probably the fastest I've ever skied out that trail, because the longer I went, the more confidence I had in the ability of those skis to hang onto the turn. So I guess you get to pick these days. You know, the ski is light and wide and skis amazingly well. So that's, you know, what more could you ask for?
The one place I haven't really arrived on a firm opinion when it comes to ski waist width, if you will, is corn. I've had great corn days on any number of width skis. Has anybody, like, if you have a perfect corn day up in your zone, Lance, which do you gravitate toward? I mean, notwithstanding the ski in, ski out, whatever.
I guess I agree with you, and I don't think that corn really cares about your waist width. You could be on an 80 and be fine. You'd be on 105 and be fine. So it's not the corn when I'm trying to decide which ski to grab, even though the day's objective might be a corn descent off a peak. I'll think about, is there any chance for powder on a north face, or is it a long approach? So I'll take a really skinny ski that's going to be super light. So I'll just base my selection on other conditions around the corn.
So let's get back to that first question. If I'm looking for a quiver of one, East Coast, West Coast, I'm skiing primarily the resort, and I'm traveling for some touring. I'm doing some touring close to home. What is my ultimate setup? And I'm an intermediate advanced skier, and I can really only afford one shot. Shaggy, where would you start that conversation?
Oh boy, get to build a dream quiver. So for the East Coast skier quiver of one, I'd have to say, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, something in the 95 waisted range. The Blizzard 0G 95 comes to mind. It's a ripping ski. The BD Helio 95, or maybe the Fisher Hannibal 96. I'd tend towards a 3-buckle boot, a Mistrali, probably the RS, or as I mentioned earlier, the Fisher Transalp Pro, which I didn't get to ski, but that thing looks rad. And then for binding, I'd probably recommend the Kingpin, the Marker Kingpin. If you're going to mix it up in and out of bounds and you're only going to buy one setup, I'd say that. Or if you're a Clydesdale, maybe that Duke PT from Marker, which I haven't been able to ski, but based on the reviews and some of my testing buddies that have skied it, they really liked it. West Coast quiver one, I'd go with a low 100 waisted stick, maybe a Blizzard 0G 105 again, or the Armada Tracer 108 has always been a standout year after year. I don't think they've changed that much in the last couple of years, and it's still just an easy ski to maneuver in a variety of snow conditions. For the boots, I'd stick with a 3-buckle boot, East or West Coast. I wouldn't change that up. The two recommendations or standouts for me were that Scarpa and that Fisher. And again, same with the bindings. If you're going to split time in and out of bounds, I'd probably say a Marker Kingpin or the PT if you're a little on the heftier side.
Marla, what do you think?
I'd say my answer is pretty straightforward about that perfect quiver of one. So starting with the skis, maybe it was because I had so much opportunity to spend many, many days up and down in virtually every condition on the Black Diamond Helio Carbons. But between the 95 and the 104, the 95 I'd probably recommend more for East Coast, 104 a little bit more for West, just based on snow conditions. But I mean, I remember when specifically the Black Diamond Helios first came out amid a whole series of skis that were when manufacturers were first starting to use carbon fiber technology in their skis. It was like riding a bike without a seat. There was no absorption, and it wasn't really fun, and it was loud and chattery. And just to see the progression of that technology over the last 10 years, I mean, I can't say enough good things about the Helio Carbon. So that's hands down my top choice for East and West.
Right on. Darrin, I know we haven't talked a lot about 4-buckle boots, and I know you're an ex-racer, 4-buckle guy generally, except when you're touring and you can have a bunch of boots because you're next door and you're a sample size foot. I guess I'd tee it up by saying, if you look at K2, Atomic, Solomon, Fisher, Lang, they're all awesome. Technica, they're all great. And I just tell people to go with fit. They're so close in performance. I mean, they're different, but they're all just so quality. They execute their mission so well.
Yeah, they're all solid, super solid. You can't tell a big difference from a plug boot anymore, a full-on race plug boot, to an AT 4-buckle boot. Like, you can get a 130, 140 flex out of an AT boot now. It's fantastic. Not the thing I would want to go spend a whole lot of time doing long backcountry adventures, but for small side country tours, sure, they're great. Plus, you can't beat the confidence that they give you on the way down, especially for a guy like me, right? 200 pounds and ready to just crank on that boot and into that whatever wasted ski to make that turn. They're fantastic. One of my faves this year was the Technical Coaches. It just a super solid, not the lightest, but light enough to do some tours, but just fantastically solid.
And really damp. That and the K2 Mindbender, just really damp and supple, kind of progressive. Tyler, how about you? You got a quiver of one?
Yeah, kind of in a little bit of contrast to Darrin, even though I'm skiing on the East Coast and a lot of our touring is, or a lot of our skiing is mostly at resorts, I do actually spend the majority of my time touring, whether that's skinning up the resort in the morning or after work, or just going for long walks in the woods on the weekend. So I'm in that 3-buckle boot sweet spot that Shaggy was talking about, whether that's the Transalp Pro, that Del Bello Free Tour 130. I actually ski a Dynafit TLT8 most of the time, so 2 buckles, going even lighter than that. But a ski about 100 underfoot, like the DPS, the Pagoda Tour 100, so the narrower version of what Lance was speaking about earlier. And then I have tech bindings on all my skis, and I'm pretty light. I don't carve huge turns when I am skiing the resort, so I'm willing to trust my life with those bindings a little bit. And the Solomon MTN or Atomic Backland is a great binding that I really like. The G3Z, same deal. And then with both of those bindings, you can choose whether you want to run them with brakes or not, depending on whether you're spending most of your time touring or you are in the backcountry. So pretty light setup, not super inbounds friendly, but can work inbounds if you're that 80% out of bounds, 20% inbound skier, or occasional day inbound skier.
How about you, Lance? What's your quiver of one recommendation for the people?
I guess I'd follow along the lines of Tyler mostly. I'm in the West, and skiing pretty much 100% backcountry personally. So that's my slant. So I don't think I actually have a good voice to speak for, a 130 flex resort boot. I don't know what that is. In terms of skis, I would agree with Marla and Tyler. The DPS Pagoda Tour 100 be a perfect quiver of one. Great float, but remarkable edge hold at the same time. And the BD Helio 104 for exactly the same reasons. And I think it's kind of interesting. Those skis have some similarities. They're built on lightweight cores. They weigh almost exactly the same per surface area. But the key ingredient that's, I don't want to say it's new, but it's kind of newish, where they've matched it up with a very light ski designed for the backcountry, is the sidewall construction. So it just makes it much more predictable, much more stable, increases the dampening quite a bit. So when you get that variable snow inbounds or out, it's just so much better able to handle it, as opposed to kind of chattery, lighter, sort of all carbon skis that we might have had, maybe 10 years ago, or certainly 5 to 10 years ago. So I think that's a huge improvement in skis. Boots, it depends on what you want and how much you weigh. I think, as Tyler pointed out, is hugely important. Boots, I like something like a Scarpa F1 LT. It's pretty much as light as it gets, but it's very stiff laterally. Tours remarkably well. I think a lighter person going at somewhat less than light speed at the resort, it's going to be fine. And again, you wouldn't want a crazy light setup like that. You wouldn't want to ruin it with giant heavy bindings. So I think you can come in with your bindings in the, slightly over a pound per pair. So things like the Black Diamond and the Black Diamond distributed ATK bindings. There's a lot of choices and a broad range of brakes or not, and release values to suit your weight and your skiing style.
Well, I'm going to go with the origin story angle on this, and that is we had the opportunity here this year. We didn't get as many of the skis as folks west got, but we got a nice helping of some Chamonix-inspired skis, all of which had, traditional sidewall construction, but were really light. And obviously Black Crows is there. The Navis Freebird was a great ski. The Zag skis were like real standouts. I wasn't familiar with their line as much, but their stuff is awesome. And the Ogsos as well, really fun. And they had a couple versions, one with like 0 camber. They had like the same exact ski, one with no camber and one with a little bit of camber. And, Darrin and I played with those, and it was pretty fun. And on that surfy corn, that no camber ski was a lot of fun. And as far as bindings go, I really think that Frichi Xenic, Xenic, however you say it, Xenic, I think. Sounds like a sleeping aid type drug, but that's a great all-around binding. It's damp. It's not, it's not rigid. It's got a reliable release. I think one of the more reliable releases of any of the tech bindings. I'd match it with, while we didn't test it this year, the La Sportiva Spectre, which is still on the market, that 4-buckle boot. It's like 110 flex, tons of range of motion. The new Vanguard, which is stiffer boot, was really nice, kind of almost just ridiculously comfy for a boot that had like 70 degrees of motion in it. That's a pretty good all-around boot. And all of that stuff, those boots in particular, tour really well. And they probably on the aggregate out-tour those 4-buckle competitors, I would say. We're going to talk a little bit about skins, and I'm just going to turn the mic over to Lance. Lance is our longtime skin tester. What are you telling people about skins? Because, man, like bindings, like boots, like skis, there's a ton of options now, and I think a lot of people are confused by how many options are out on the market.
There are a lot, and it can be confusing. When I first started testing skins, I don't know, a long time ago, I found it harder to pull out some of the differences. And I didn't notice things as much as it's this skin glide better than that. This glue might be a little stickier than that. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Hard to say. But I think there's more choices out there, and people can dial in whatever they want. I think the things to consider are how durable do you want the skin to be? Do you want this thing to last through 3 pairs of skis? How important is glide to you? And most people say, oh, it's important, but until you have different skins on different snow conditions and sort of internalize what that feels like with each stride, it's kind of hard to say. And we were talking before about the new adhesives, acrylic primarily, as opposed to hot melt. And I think that's a kind of a personal decision there. Some people want the reliability of the hot melt, so that it's super sticky in any temperatures, even well below 0F. And some people just don't want to hassle with that, and they want a skin that's easy to pull, adhesive from adhesive, stays stuck to your ski well enough with a little bit of care to make sure you don't get it covered with snow. There are no issues down to certainly single-digit temps. And then the other factor is weight. So the difference in weight between the lightest skins out there and the heaviest might be 50% heavier than the lightest. And so that if you're spending hundreds or thousands of dollars to knock a pound off your equipment, you don't want to splurge and throw away a half a pound on your skins. So that was a very long-winded way to work around saying there are a lot of options. There's nothing, I wouldn't say that there's one skin that meets all of those criteria. It isn't one that's the lightest, that's the stickiest, that's the most durable, that glides the best. But thinking about how each of those factors weigh into your average touring day, or what's important to you, what do you want to avoid? Like maybe the biggest thing is you never want the aggravation of the adhesive failing on a cold, windy, snowy day in the backcountry.
Tyler, can you translate everything that Lance just said for our listener, please?
Hot melt's the sticky stuff. Acrylic's the less sticky. I think one thing that I've started to tell people is that there's more out there than probably the orange, stiff, sticky black diamond skin that you got into backcountry skiing on. And it's worth considering what the options are, because some of them are far lighter and you can pack them up and actually put them into the skin pocket in your jacket. Some of them glide way, way, way better. Some of them last longer. Some of them are far easier to separate glue from glue, and you don't need to worry about tearing your rotator cuff when you're pulling them apart to stick them onto your ski. So, consider a skin that is a nylon mohair mix or an all mohair blend. Consider one that is one of these acrylic adhesives from Contour or Cola or something like that. Just explore all the options and go to a gear shop and play with them a little bit and find what's going to work best for you.
I think it's really key, because the best skin for Steamboat is not the best skin for Vermont or the North Cascades. It's really helpful to get that local knowledge when it comes to skins, more than anything else, I think. So I don't think we've really helped our listener at all with the skin discussion, but you can always give us a call. I actually do. I do take random, and I know you have, Tyler. We'll get random people calling in here. Holly will pick up the phone. Hey, can you talk to Bob? He's a subscriber from Washington and wants to ask you about this boot. And sure enough, an hour later, I'm still talking to Bob, and we haven't talked about boots at all. We're going to spend Christmas together. I'm going to meet his kids. I'm going to his kids' graduation next spring.
Yeah, call us up at 802-644-6606. Hello, you're on Backcountry Magazine Gear Talk.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining us, and thanks for testing gear, and I'm so psyched to see you in March. This episode was brought to you by Minus 33. Stay comfortable with 100% merino wool. Go to minus33.com, that's minus33.com, and use code 33backcountry15 at checkout for 15% off today. The Backcountry Podcast is produced by Backcountry Magazine, an imprint of Height of Land Publications in Jeffersonville, Vermont. Betsy Monero is our managing editor. Our music was composed by Alex Paul. Bob Rusnock of Blue Stream Voice and Imaging is our engineer. Additional thanks to Tyler Cohen, Tom Hallberg, Mike Lorenz, Robin Earl, Paul Davis, Justin Ryer, Michelle Peoples, Holly Howard, and Karen Heward. At Backcountry Magazine, our small staff works hard to bring you stories that are thoughtfully edited, beautifully produced, and thoroughly fact-checked. Please consider supporting our independent journalism with a subscription to the magazine. You can subscribe or check out other swag at our website, backcountrymagazine.com. Use the code PODCAST for 10% off your entire order. I'm Adam Howard. Until next time, I'll see you in the hills. Thanks for listening.